A beggar saw that a millionaire had thrown a luxury rug into the trash. She quickly decided to pick it up and unroll it. As soon as she opened it, her body shook. Before starting the video, tell me where you are watching this video and what time it is. Emma hunched over the overflowing dumpster, her thin fingers numb in the biting winter air. She sifted through the garbage with practiced care, extracting a crumpled loaf of bread and a dented can of beans. Her world was this, a ceaseless scavenger hunt for scraps that might keep her alive another day. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow on the urban jungle around her, where wealth and destitution clashed at every corner. She pulled her ragged coat tighter, eyes darting towards the gleaming towers in the distance. Those buildings seemed like a different universe, filled with people who drank wine out of crystal glasses and wasted food worth more than her week's scrounging. Emma didn't envy them. Envy required energy she didn't have. But she often wondered what it would feel like to live without the constant gnaw of hunger or the sting of icy wind cutting through threadbare clothes. This part of the city, her home for years, was a grim tapestry of graffiti-streaked walls and narrow alleyways littered with remnants of human neglect. Yet amidst the desolation, Emma's resilience shone. Her life was a series of small victories. A warm meal found, a kind word received, or a night spent undisturbed. As the day waned, Emma moved to another dumpster near an upscale residential area. Here, the contrast was even starker. Luxury cars lined the streets, their glossy exteriors reflecting the golden hour, while Emma worked in the shadow of wealth she could never touch. She didn't resent the rich, but she couldn't ignore the widening chasm between their world and hers. A soft rustle behind her startled Emma. She turned, clutching her meager finds protectively, but it was just a cat, its green eyes gleaming in the dim light. With a sigh, she resumed her search, determined to make the most of what little the day had offered. Emma was about to move to another bin when the low hum of an engine caught her attention. She froze, instinctively retreating into the shadows. From her vantage point, she watched as a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its glossy surface gleaming even in the dim light. The car's design screamed opulence, one of those vehicles Emma knew could probably buy her a lifetime's worth of meals. The car door opened, and out stepped a sharply dressed man. His coat, long and elegant, swayed slightly as he moved to the back of the vehicle. Emma couldn't see his face clearly, but his posture and the deliberate way he moved radiated wealth and authority. He didn't glance around as he opened the trunk, his actions precise, as though this were a routine chore. To Emma's surprise, the man reached in and pulled out a large rolled-up rug. Even in the growing dusk, the rug's rich texture and intricate patterns were unmistakable. It wasn't just any rug, it was luxury incarnate. Gold and crimson threads shimmered as the man carried it to the side of the road, his shoes crunching softly on the pavement. Emma frowned, her curiosity piqued. Why would someone throw away something so beautiful? She watched as the man unceremoniously tossed the rug into the nearest trash heap. He dusted his hands off with a slight grimace, muttered something she couldn't hear, and returned to the car. Moments later, the engine purred back to life, and the vehicle disappeared down the street, leaving behind a plume of exhaust and the discarded rug. For a moment, Emma didn't move. Was this some kind of trap? Items like that didn't just end up in the trash for no reason. But as the seconds ticked by, her curiosity grew stronger than her caution. Her eyes remained fixed on the rug, its edges fraying slightly, but still exuding a strange allure. She glanced around. No one else was in sight. With a deep breath, Emma approached the heap. The rug seemed even more luxurious up close. Its surface was almost velvety under her calloused fingers. She hesitated, then began to drag it out, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The rug was heavier than Emma had expected, the kind of weight that seemed out of place for mere fabric. Straining, she pulled it free from the pile of trash, her arms trembling with the effort. It tumbled onto the pavement, rolling slightly to one side. The fading daylight caught the intricate designs woven into its surface, golden vines, ruby-red flowers, and a border of delicate silver filigree. Emma crouched beside it, her breathing shallow. Something about the rug didn't feel right. It wasn't just its opulence. There was an almost magnetic quality to it, as though it held secrets just beneath its ornate surface. She ran her fingers over the edge, feeling for anything unusual. Her hand brushed against a small lump beneath the fabric. She froze. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest as she flipped a corner of the rug, unrolling it a few inches at a time. The smell of musty fabric hit her first, followed by the sight of something that made her breath hitch, a bundle of tightly wrapped cash. The green bills, crisp and untouched, formed neat stacks secured with rubber bands. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. But it wasn't just money. As Emma continued to unroll the rug, more items came into view. A small black leather case slipped out, landing with a soft thud. She opened it cautiously, revealing a set of gleaming keys and what appeared to be a USB drive. Further along there was a sheaf of papers, legal documents from the look of them, though their language was dense and intimidating. Emma's hands began to tremble. This wasn't just a discarded rug. It was a cash secret, something far beyond anything she had ever stumbled across in her years of scavenging. The weight of its significance bore down on her as she sat back on her heels, her mind racing. Who would throw this away? Why? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do with it? As she gazed at the pile of unexpected treasures, a cold shiver ran down her spine. Somewhere deep inside, Emma knew that whatever she had just uncovered was bound to change her life. Whether for better or worse, she couldn't yet tell. Emma sat on the cold pavement, staring at the unrolled rug and its hidden bounty. The sight of the money alone was enough to send her mind spiraling. She couldn't help but calculate the impact it could have on her life. A stack like that, no, all the stacks combined, could pull her out of the hell she lived in. Could buy her food, warmth, maybe even a home. Her fingers hovered over the bundles, trembling. But then her gaze fell on the documents and the USB drive. The realization dawned slowly. This wasn't just about money. This was something bigger, something dangerous. Emma bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. What was she supposed to do? A part of her, the desperate part, screamed for her to take the cash and disappear. No one would know, no one would care. She could finally escape the endless cycle of poverty and humiliation. She deserved that, didn't she? After everything life had taken from her. But another part of her whispered caution. The rug wasn't hers, nor were its contents. What if someone was looking for it? What if she kept it and found herself hunted by people far more powerful than she could handle? Emma's stomach churned. She thought of the mysterious man who had thrown the rug away. His nonchalance felt calculated now, as though he'd wanted to get rid of something incriminating. The documents, written in a language she couldn't fully understand, might hold answers, but answers came with questions, and questions came with risks. Her head dropped into her hands, and for the first time in years, Emma felt the sting of tears. No one ever prepared you for choices like this. She looked at the keys, polished, pristine, and almost mocking her uncertainty. Were they to a car? Safe. A place where more secrets awaited. She bundled the cash and items back into the rug, wrapping it tightly. The evening shadows had grown longer, the city's hum quieter. Emma glanced around nervously, paranoia prickling at the back of her neck. She didn't know what to do, but she couldn't stay here. Hugging the rug close to her chest, she resolved to make a decision later, somewhere safer. As she slipped into the night, a single thought consumed her. Had anyone seen her? Emma hurried down the dimly lit alley, her arms aching from the weight of the rug. Every shadow seemed to stretch and reach for her, and every sound made her heart leap. Her thoughts raced. She needed a plan, a safe place to figure out what she'd gotten herself into. But where? Her usual haunts weren't secure enough for something like this. She ducked into an abandoned building where she often slept. The shattered windows and peeling walls had never offered much comfort, but tonight they felt suffocating. Placing the rug in a corner, she sat down and tried to calm her pounding heart. That was when she noticed it, a figure lingering at the entrance to the alley. A tall man in a dark coat stood under the dim glow of a street lamp, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. He wasn't moving, just standing there as if waiting. Emma's breath caught. Had he been following her? Or was it just paranoia? She turned away, pretending not to notice, but the sense of being watched lingered. As the hours crawled by, Emma barely slept. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were plagued by the image of the rug unraveling, revealing horrors she couldn't comprehend. The next morning, a crumpled piece of paper was waiting for her when she stepped outside. Someone had slipped it under the door during the night. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. Asterisk, we know what you found. Keep it quiet if you value your life. Asterisk. Emma's blood ran cold. The words blurred as her pulse thundered in her ears. Someone knew. Someone had seen her. She frantically scanned her surroundings, but the alley seemed empty. She pressed her back against the door, trying to steady her breathing. What should she do? Who could she trust? The police felt like an obvious choice, but what if they were connected to whoever had left the note? The rug's contents might implicate powerful people, and the risk of betrayal was too high. Her mind settled on one name: Liam, a kind-hearted volunteer at a local shelter who had always treated her with respect. He wasn't rich or influential, but he was honest. Maybe he could help her decide what to do next. Hugging the rug closer, Emma set off to find him, praying she wasn't being followed. Emma found Liam at the shelter, serving bowls of hot soup to a line of weary faces. The sight of his calm demeanor offered a sliver of comfort, though her anxiety still gnawed at her insides. She waited until he stepped away from the crowd, then approached him with cautious urgency. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need your help. It's serious." Liam studied her face, concern replacing his usual easygoing smile. "Emma, what's wrong? You look terrified." She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I found something valuable, but I think it might be dangerous." He led her to a quiet corner of the shelter, away from prying ears. Emma unraveled her story in hushed tones, describing the discarded rug, the hidden money, and the threatening note. Liam listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every word. "This isn't just dangerous," he said finally, his voice low. "It sounds like you stumbled into something big. Maybe illegal. Do you still have the rug?" Emma nodded. "I hid it nearby. But I don't know what to do. If I go to the police, they could be involved," Liam finished grimly. "And if they're not, whoever left that note might come after you before the police can do anything." Emma's stomach sank. "So what do I do? I can't just keep hiding." Liam frowned, deep in thought. "We need more information. The documents, the USB, you said you couldn't understand them, right? I know someone who might be able to help. A journalist I trust. She's exposed corruption before. If this is as big as it seems, she'll know what to do." Emma's pulse quickened. The idea of involving someone with resources and experience was both terrifying and reassuring. "Do you think she'll help me?" "She'll help the truth," Liam replied. "But you have to be ready for the fallout. This won't end quietly." Before Emma could respond, she caught a glimpse of movement outside the shelter's window. A man in a dark coat stood across the street, his eyes fixed on the building. It was the same figure from the alley. "They've found me," she whispered, panic rising. Liam's jaw tightened. "We need to move. Now." Grabbing her arm, he led her out the back door, away from the prying eyes that seemed to be closing in. The safe house Liam had taken Emma to was a modest apartment tucked above a quiet bookstore. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Grace, was waiting for them, her laptop open and papers scattered across a small wooden table. She wasted no time diving into the contents Emma had brought, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she examined the documents and decrypted the USB drive. "This is huge," Grace murmured, her eyes widening as she scrolled through files. The accounts here tied directly to offshore holdings. Fraud, embezzlement. And this. She pointed to a scanned contract bearing the name of a prominent real estate tycoon, the same man Emma had seen discarding the rug. Before they could discuss further, a thunderous knock rattled the apartment door. Everyone froze. Grace's face darkened. "Did you lead anyone here?" "No," Liam said firmly, but Emma's heart sank. Had the man following her tracked them down? The knocking turned into pounding. "Open up or we'll break the door down." A voice bellowed, cold and authoritative. Liam signaled for Emma to stay behind him. Grace tucked the USB drive into her pocket and whispered, "Stall them. I'll make a copy." Reluctantly, Liam opened the door a crack. On the other side stood the tycoon himself, flanked by two burly men. His face was a mask of fury, though his voice was chillingly calm. "I believe you have something of mine," the tycoon said, his eyes narrowing on Liam before drifting over his shoulder to Emma. "We don't know what you're talking about," Liam replied, his tone steady despite the tension in the room. "Let's not waste time." The tycoon stepped forward, his henchman close behind. "That rug contains more than just fabric. It has my money, my documents, and my life's work. Hand it over, and I'll forget I ever saw you." Emma's breath hitched, but she stood her ground. "Your life's work," she said, her voice shaking. "You mean exploiting people and stealing from them?" The tycoon's lips curled into a smirk. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, girl. This isn't a game. Give me what's mine, or I'll take it by force." Emma clenched her fists. "Oh, you don't deserve to keep it." The tycoon's smirk vanished, replaced by cold rage. "You'll regret that decision." The room seemed to close in around Emma as the tycoon's threat hung in the air. Her fear was palpable, but so was her resolve. For too long, her life had been dictated by survival and silence, but this moment felt different, charged with the possibility of change, no matter how dangerous. Grace cleared her throat, drawing the tycoon's attention. "I've seen what's on that USB," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Offshore accounts, shell companies, bribes paid to city officials to push poor families out of their homes. You're not just some millionaire. You're a parasite." The tycoon's face darkened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured to one of his henchmen. "Retrieve the rug," he said flatly. The man moved toward it, but Liam stepped in his way. "You're not touching anything." The tension boiled over. The henchman lunged, but Liam was ready, shoving him back into the tycoon's other lackey. Emma watched in frozen shock as the room erupted into chaos. Liam struggled to hold them off while Grace darted to her laptop, frantically typing. Emma snapped out of her paralysis when the tycoon grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "Do you have any idea what I could do to you?" he snarled. "Do you?" she shot back, her voice stronger than she felt. "You think you can just scare me into silence? I've lived my whole life being scared, of hunger, of cold, of people like you. I'm done being afraid." She wrenched free, the USB drive slipping from Grace's pocket into her hand as the tycoon lunged. But before he could seize her, Grace let out a triumphant shout. "Got it. The files are uploading to a secure server. Even if you take us down, your secrets are out." The tycoon froze, the color draining from his face. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his composure unraveling. "Maybe," Grace said coolly, "but you'll regret it more." The tycoon's henchmen dragged him toward the door, their retreat hasty and graceless. "This isn't over," he bellowed as they disappeared into the night. Emma sank to the floor, her chest heaving. She looked at Grace, then Liam. "Did we just win?" Grace smirked. "Not yet. But we will." The night was far from over. Grace's triumph was short-lived as she turned back to her laptop. They might have retreated, but they're not done. If those files aren't public before they regroup, they'll come back with everything they've got. Emma clenched the USB drive in her hand, its weight feeling like a ticking time bomb. "What do we do now?" Grace glanced at her, admiration flickering in her eyes. "We finish what we started. But it's going to get dangerous." Liam placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. We're in this together. The plan was simple in theory but harrowing in execution. Emma and Liam would act as decoys, drawing attention away from Grace as she worked to upload the files to multiple platforms, ensuring they couldn't be silenced. Emma hesitated, the enormity of the risk pressing down on her. But when she thought of the families displaced by the tycoon's greed, the lives shattered by his schemes, her resolve hardened. She wouldn't back down. The trio moved swiftly. Emma and Liam left through the front, deliberately making noise to draw attention. It worked. A dark SUV screeched to a halt outside, its headlights glaring like an accusatory gaze. Men spilled out, their aggressive movements confirming their intentions. "Over here!" Liam shouted, leading them away from the bookstore and into the labyrinth of alleyways. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as they ran. She clutched the USB drive tightly, praying Grace had enough time. The men were relentless, their shouts echoing off the brick walls. At one point, Liam shoved a dumpster into their path, buying a few precious seconds. "We can't keep this up," Emma panted, her chest heaving. "What if they catch us?" "They won't," Liam said, though his own fear was evident. "We just need to keep going." In the distance, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Liam had called them earlier, a desperate gamble to turn the tide. The men chasing them faltered, their confidence shaken. It was enough. Emma and Liam slipped into the shadows, leaving their pursuers scrambling. When they returned to the bookstore hours later, Grace met them with a weary but victorious smile. "It's done," she said. "The files are everywhere." Relief washed over Emma, though it was tempered by exhaustion. They had survived the night, but the battle wasn't over yet. The fallout from Grace's uploads was swift and explosive. By morning, the tycoon's name was splashed across every major news outlet. Headlines screamed of corruption, embezzlement, and illegal land deals, backed by irrefutable evidence from the leaked files. His carefully constructed empire of lies crumbled under the weight of public outrage. Emma watched the news unfold from Grace's apartment, the words on the screen barely registering. Arrest warrants had been issued for the tycoon and several of his associates. Investigations were already underway into the displaced families, with promises of restitution from local authorities scrambling to save face. For the first time in her life, Emma saw the powerful held accountable, and it felt surreal. "You did it," Liam said softly, sitting beside her. "You started this." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed. "We did it. I couldn't have done any of this without you or Grace." Grace, who was busy fielding calls from reporters and advocacy groups, flashed them a tired grin. "You're giving me too much credit. You're the one who decided to open that rug. You could have walked away, but you didn't." Emma smiled faintly, though her heart still carried the weight of the night. The thought of what could have happened, what still might, lingered in her mind. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Grace said, leaning back in her chair, "he'll face justice. But don't expect it to be easy. People like him don't go down without a fight." Indeed, as the days passed, the tycoon's lawyers tried to discredit the leaks, claiming the files were falsified. But the overwhelming evidence, combined with public testimony from the displaced families, made his denials ring hollow. Images of his arrest, his once pristine suit now rumpled and his face lined with desperation, became a symbol of his downfall. In the aftermath, Emma found herself at the center of a growing movement. Her story inspired others to speak out, their voices breaking through the silence that had allowed corruption to thrive. Community leaders began to organize, demanding accountability and reforms that would protect the vulnerable. For Emma, it was overwhelming but empowering. She had gone from being invisible to becoming a beacon of hope for those who had none. For the first time in years, Emma walked the streets without her usual heavy cloak of invisibility. People recognized her now, not as a beggar but as a hero. The community that had once ignored her plight now extended kindness, a smile, a nod, or even offers of help. It was strange but heartwarming, a stark contrast to the isolation she had grown used to. One afternoon, Liam approached her with a grin. "I've got something for you," he said, holding an envelope. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check. The letter was from a local non-profit organization that had been moved by her courage. The funds, they wrote, were a gesture of gratitude and a stepping stone toward a stable life. Her eyes filled with tears as she stared at the check. It wasn't just money. It was hope, a chance to rebuild. She looked at Liam, her voice shaking. This is real." "It's real," he said gently. "You earned it." With Liam's help, Emma rented a modest but safe apartment. The first night she slept there, under a clean blanket in a warm bed, she cried quietly to herself. For so long, survival had been her only focus. Now, for the first time, she could think about the future. But it wasn't just her life that was changing. The fallout from the tycoon's exposure continued to ripple through the city. The local government implemented reforms to prevent similar abuses of power. Families displaced by the tycoon's schemes began receiving compensation and assistance to rebuild their lives. A community that had been fractured started to heal. Emma found herself at the center of it all. Grace invited her to speak at events, sharing her story to inspire others. Though public speaking terrified her, Emma pushed through the fear, knowing her voice carried weight now. "You have no idea how many lives you've changed," Grace told her after one such event. Emma smiled, though her modesty kept her from fully believing it. She was just a woman who had opened a rug and decided to do the right thing. But in doing so, she had set a chain of events in motion that no one could ignore. Her new beginning was a reflection of the city's, a story of resilience, redemption, and the power of standing up to injustice. Emma sat on a park bench, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands. The park had once been a place she avoided. Too many people, too many judging eyes. But now it felt like a sanctuary, a place to think about everything that had happened. She watched children play on the swings, their laughter rising like music into the crisp afternoon air. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel at peace. She thought about the day she found the rug, how her life had been hanging by a thread. At the time, she'd seen herself as powerless. But looking back, she realized how much strength it had taken to step into the unknown, to choose courage over fear. Her thoughts turned to Liam and Grace, two people who had stood by her when they didn't have to. She felt a pang of gratitude, not just for their help but for the belief they had in her. She had been invisible to the world for so long that their support had felt like a lifeline. Grace's words from their last meeting echoed in her mind. "The world needs more people like you. People who care enough to take risks for the truth." It still didn't feel real. Emma wasn't used to being someone people admired. But she also knew she couldn't let that stop her from embracing the changes in her life. She had started to volunteer at the same shelter where she'd met Liam, offering food and support to those who were still struggling. Helping others gave her a purpose she hadn't realized she needed. As the sun began to set, Emma looked up at the fiery orange sky. Her journey hadn't been easy, and she knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time she felt ready to face them. The rug, the tycoon, the danger. They were all reminders of how much one person could do when they refused to give up. Emma took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She was grateful for the life she was building and for the strength she had found within herself. It was a strength she hadn't known existed, but it had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Years later, Emma's name became synonymous with courage and resilience. She wasn't just the woman who had uncovered corruption. She was a symbol of what it meant to fight back against seemingly insurmountable odds. The city changed in visible ways after her actions. Policies were enacted to protect vulnerable communities from exploitation. Affordable housing initiatives flourished, and the displaced families who had been at the heart of the tycoon schemes found new homes. These changes didn't happen overnight, but Emma's actions had sparked a movement, inspiring others to demand accountability and fairness. Emma herself became a quiet leader in her community. Though she shied away from the spotlight, her story inspired countless others to stand up for themselves and their neighbors. The shelter where she had once sought help became a thriving hub of activism and support, with Emma as one of its most dedicated volunteers. When children asked their parents about the woman whose name they heard in news stories or neighborhood conversations, they were told of her bravery, her selflessness, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Emma's legacy wasn't just about what she had done. It was about the lives she had touched and the hope she had ignited in a city that had once seemed so divided. Emma's life, once defined by struggle and survival, transformed into one of purpose and fulfillment. The funds she received as a token of gratitude helped her secure a steady income, but it was her determination to create change that truly gave her a sense of triumph. She attended workshops and classes, building skills that allowed her to advocate for others who had been silenced by poverty or fear. Her apartment, modest but warm, became a safe haven for herself and others. Children in the neighborhood often stopped by, drawn to her welcoming nature and the stories she would share about her journey. Many saw her as a living example of perseverance, someone who had risen from nothing to make a difference. Liam remained a close friend and confidant, continuing his work at the shelter while supporting Emma's growing role in the community. Grace, too, stayed connected, occasionally enlisting Emma's help in uncovering other local injustices. As for the tycoon, his name became a cautionary tale. Stripped of his power and wealth, he spent his days in prison, a stark reminder that no one was untouchable. Emma's personal triumph wasn't just in what she had overcome, but in how she had used her experience to lift others. Sitting by her window on a quiet evening, Emma gazed out at the bustling streets below. The city had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. People had started to believe in their power to make a difference, and she was proud to have played a part in that change. She thought back to that day, the discarded rug, the impossible choice, and the terrifying risks. It all seemed so far away now, yet the lessons it taught her remained as vivid as ever. Her mind turned to the many faces she had met along the way. Liam, whose steadfast kindness had been her anchor. Grace, whose tenacity reminded her that the truth was worth fighting for, and the countless others who had stood up after her, emboldened by her story. Emma leaned back, a soft smile gracing her face. Life had not been easy, but it had been meaningful. Her journey taught her that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it. And integrity wasn't a gift. It was a choice made every day. Her voice carried softly as she whispered, "No one is too small to make a difference." The city lights flickered like stars, echoing her sentiment. Her story, like those lights, would guide others for years to come.